Hello and welcome back to JLXP, kind of a surprise emergent episode based on the TSM news that dropped earlier today. It is currently 2:55 Pacific time. We're going to record this and upload it as soon as possible on a Thursday, and we're going to react to the TSM news. But first, I want to reintroduce Tim to the channel. You and I did a podcast right when COVID started back in 2020 about stats, and you returned. Like nothing of note happened in between. It's just we're back. How you doing?
For either of us, yeah. Yeah, doing really good. Glad to be back on the show. I think there's a lot to talk about, especially with TSM as there always is, but especially today.
Yeah, so to catch people up, if they haven't been super up to date with the TSM news, there was an interesting announcement that they've done. I think this is actually a little bit out of character for TSM, the way they've announced this.
Very.
So they sent out a tweet that actually linked to an upcomer article, which I'll link in the description, where they say Shenyi will return to the LCS for week 5, but also Takeover, their academy mid laner, is going to start over Keaiduo, which they like snuck in at the end. But within this, they gave their reason for why Shenyi wasn't playing for the past 2 weeks. They said in week 2, Shenyi locked in a champion on stage without communicating with the team or the coaches. The coaching staff followed up afterwards and they said it's a negative and disrespectful attitude. There's also some stuff in there about how they wanted to protect the privacy of the team and the player. I actually generally buy this story. Obviously, they're going to leave out some of the details of exactly what happened. I'm a little surprised they even mentioned that part instead of just saying like Shenyi is back, but I imagine they faced so much public pressure and the collateral damage of protecting the reason ended up being much greater than the reason itself. So they're just kind of out with it now. But what do you think about not only kind of what's happened so far, but also their choice of the way they announced it?
Yeah, it's really interesting. And since they brought in kind of a bunch of new VPs throughout the org
Yeah, they
and
have
the one
Dominic
kind of in
now.
charge of, Dominic Callis is now kind of VP of like esports or whatever his title is. And like he started reaching out to a bunch of media people, myself included, and being like, hey, I want to build some relationships here. And you can see they're pretty quickly acting on that and showing, because for a long time, TSM has been the org that had bad relationships with journalists.
Yes.
And he's fixing that, or he's trying to fix that. So I thought it was really fascinating they chose to do this through a media outlet press release, basically.
Yep.
More an interview, not really a press release, but like they're putting their money where their mouth is with this. In terms of what they actually announced and how they like what they shared, I definitely get the sense that they're trying to find the right balance between protecting the privacy of their players and team versus, giving the fans not just very bland PR, like, hey, we're not going to say any details, just trust us kind of
Yeah.
stuff. Because over the last couple of weeks, with not only TSM and the Shenyi situation, but also C9 and LS, there's been a lot of very corporate, bland PR statements that have had huge backlash. And TSM, I would say, is the smaller one of those two.
Yeah.
But I'm sure they've been looking at both, right? And seeing, hey, the orgs are the ones that are getting hurt here. And also to some extent like Spica, and there's
For sure.
been some
Speaker
drama around
took a
that.
ridiculous amount of
Yeah.
heat. And I even saw, I actually hate it when this happens, and this is a different topic, but I was reading through the Reddit thread of the Blame Game video that Mark made. And there were people saying like, I don't think Speak has really ever been good. Like, I never thought he was much better than, the people he replaced back in 2018. And it's like
Yeah.
just completely discounting the MVP that he had and the LCS championship he won and all this other stuff because of like the last 2 to 4 weeks of recent reactions. I hate it when I see people discrediting players like that. But that's a little bit of a tangent. The move itself, I think, is interesting, and we'll talk about both Shenyi, Keaiduo, and Takeover. And I know you watch a lot of Academy to kind of compare the two players, but I want to go a little bit into the past and talk about how we got here. It is, to me, almost such a stark difference of what has happened to the lineage of TSM. The video that they made at the start of last year, when Bjergsen became their coach, it was actually this super cool, classy mid laner announcement video where they had like the TSM mid laners. I mean, it used to be like literally TSM was Team Solo Mid until they moved into other games and told people only to call them TSM. But it was Reginald, and they had this like nice portrait of him, almost like presidents in a hall. There was Bjergsen, and then they added Power of Evil. And you're like, oh, damn, that's super cool. Like,
Yeah.
he's the next in line. And they spend 1 year with him, and now there's like maybe this little tiny picture of Keaiduo and like an even smaller one of Takeover. Like, it's a very crowded hallway at this point, but the lineage of like team solo mid and really building around mid laners is off now. And the fact that they're swapping them like this makes it almost more of a development story. But what I want to talk about with you is let's like re-hit on the 1-8 TSM. And I want to use some of your Oracle's Elixir stats that I'm sure you've kind of tweeted and talked about in the past, but it's not just the record. You have some advanced stats in Oracle's Elixir that show TSM's performance thus far and why it's not out of the blue to like need to make changes.
Yeah, so I mean, a couple of the ones that I know you look at sometimes, and that I really like to look at are goal percent rating and goal spend percentage difference.
Yep.
So basically, capturing the goal percent rating being like how much of the time you spend with what proportion of the gold, how much do you play from ahead and behind, and by how much. And GSPD is basically margin of victory or defeat.
Yes.
And in both of these stats, TSM look pretty not great.
Yeah.
If you look at all their games so far, you've got them last in both, and not by a tiny margin either. It's changed a little bit since they changed the players. I was checking before and like filtering it on the games with Shenyi versus the games with Yursan, and actually their GPR got slightly better, but their GSPD got a little worse. So they were in the games a little more, but then they got snowballed on harder by the time it ended. Their early game improved based on early game rating is another metric that can be pretty interesting to look at. So they were hitting the mid game in a much better position, which ties into kind of the GPR being stronger, but still not above 50. So they were still falling behind more often than not, like overall their performance has been pretty dire.
Yeah, every stat that I see on Oracle's Elixir is last place. 1-8. They have the most deaths, the fewest kills, the worst GPR, the worst GSPD, the worst early game rating, and weirdly enough, also the worst mid-late rating. So because they've never converted, they've only once did they convert one of those disadvantages to a victory, and that was the Immortals game. Everyone knows, not good. We don't need to pile on too much. What was interesting for me here is Freak and I talked about this on our Sunday night podcast, where the ability to make mid-split roster changes is super, super hard. Because you could look and say, hey, Niski doesn't have a team, like bring him in. But like a visa collection process would take beyond the end of the split. If you try and sign an academy mid laner from a different team, the way a lot of those contracts are structured, I don't know the details of any individual ones. There's these really ambiguous buyouts, and all the other owners would know that TSM is in this incredibly dire situation, and you'd probably be paying this absurd amount of money for an academy mid laner. So the other option, if you're not going to play Keaiduo, who we both actually kind of identified as a poor performer, would be to bring in Takeover, who, even though TSM's academy team is in last place, Takeover has looked at least maybe better than Keaiduo so far. But I know you've watched more academy than me, so what do you think of Takeover so far in academy?
Yeah, Takeover is an interesting player as somebody who's going to come in. I think for TSM, something he's going to bring is a little bit more like maybe a little more pep in his step, like a little more willingness to jump up and try to make a play, to try to force something, to try to win his lane. I think a big issue with Keaiduo has been kind of passive laning and losing laning, honestly. Like when he lost lane very convincingly into Bjergsen, he was playing Silas Bjergsen on Zonzillion, and he just got kind of smashed in lane. You go, wait a second. Like that's really not a good look. That he's been a lot more reactive on the map rather than proactive. And Takeover's a player who's going to come in and probably switch that style up quite a bit. He prefers to play assassins, and that kind of style. He wants to snowball really hard, and that's kind of his natural fit. So given what they did with Yursan and draft him Alistar and Nautilus every game, which are like his two champions, I assume that the TSM coaching staff is going to say, hey, we'll put you on comfort. We're going to try to win the mid lane and give Spica a lot more to work with, which I think has been a really big deal. And one thing I think is not going to change is kind of the cleanliness of map play between the two mid laners. I think Takeover can get caught out at times and have kind of some ugly games. But if it snowballs in a positive direction, I think that's something that could, if it looks really good, if he gets the right performance on the day, it could look a lot better, and stylistically, it'll probably be a better fit.
Yeah, something that I think I was expecting from Keaiduo at the start of the year was more like lane dominance. I thought if the TSM team was going to succeed, it was going to be because, Tactical smashes lane, Huni smashes lane, and Keaiduo with these like Zoomer LDL mechanics was going to be able to come in and play really well, and that really hasn't been the case. And then that snowballs with the poor map play, where when I don't know exactly what's happening within the game, but the lane assignments that TSM ends up having are usually just something went critically wrong, like a minute beforehand, and Tactical's off in a side lane, when that should usually be the mid laner. And maybe at least having Takeover in could help the communication word. To me, like communication is more of a band-aid than an actual solution, but maybe like a band-aid is what they need at this point. So I think there's a chance that their map play can get better with Takeover just from a communication standpoint. And also he's played a lot more Champions queue.
Sometimes you can get an addition, just as a quick add-on to that, you can get addition by subtraction, right? Removing a voice sometimes means, and from what we've heard on solo queue and stuff, Keaiduo has a pretty loud voice.
Yeah.
I don't know whether he's communicating that loudly in the actual LCS matches, but maybe subtracting that and Takeover coming in and being a little bit more quiet and submissive, maybe that'll help them out. So.
It could help. Let's talk about their champion queue performance, because I'm probably going to continue to talk about Champions Queue. I think it has a potential to be really, really good for the scene, at least in the short term, because I think it's probably doing like nightmarish things to solo queue. But for the people that are playing a lot of it, I think it gives them far more low ping practice, which they can then transfer to stage to try and make outplays. And you also have a Champions Queue leaderboard up on Oracle's Elixir as well. Takeover's played a lot of Champ Queue, 143 games.
Yeah, it's quite a bit. There aren't that many. There are a bunch of players now who played over 100, a few in that 200 range at the very top, but having like 143, I think, is his game count as of today, and he's got a 50% win rate, which is pretty good, and based on kind of like matchmaking and so on, the quality of teammates he's been with, I've got him rated fairly well. Also, he's got an A- rating right now, which is pretty strong. So yeah, he's definitely been playing that. When you look through the champions he's playing a whole variety of stuff, a lot of combination of control mages, pretty meta, some assassins, some Silas in there, things like that. So he's definitely on the grind.
Yeah, he's 11th in games played of all players in Champions Queue. We also mentioned that just because of the volume of players in specific roles, it is a little easier for mid laners to get games. But ultimately, you just have to be sitting in queue all the time to get that value. Weirdly, Keaiduo's only played 5 Champions Queue games. The solo queue account that I have on file for him is like 800, 900 LP Challenger. I know every pro player has 2 accounts, so he's probably also playing on another one. But I'm actually very surprised that he wouldn't be playing more Champions Queue. Probably don't want to read too much into that, but just wanted to point it out. Do you want to talk about Shenyi Yirsan? Because I think there's some interesting stuff to dig into there.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, when the change happened, I was very skeptical that it was a performance-related thing from the start, and as we've heard from their information out, it very much was not. It was, an attitude and interaction with the team kind of thing. Yirsan has games now and then where he can, land really big engages on the melee champions like the Alistar Nautilus I mentioned, but all around he's fairly inconsistent and still has a lot of things to work on. Shenyi coming in, like he's going to he engages all the time. He's looking for the play. He wants to do something, and you have to feel that when the team as a whole is looking better, he's going to look a lot better because his engages will work. They'll be followed up on more often. So I was always kind of the impression that Shenyi will be back in a couple of weeks, and he is. He played in Academy, depending on if anybody watched him there. He played in Academy very much the same way as LCS. He was looking for plays all over the place, a little too much, but I don't mind that generally. Much better than the other way around. He was dying a lot because of it. He had 5 deaths a game in LCS and 4.8 in Academy, so it's kind of been the same. Both teams are performing very poorly. Yeah. So he didn't change his game. He kept at it. He's looking for things to do on the map, and we'll have to see. As Tactical has stepped up a little bit and started being a little stronger in the team fights and starting to carry games more. Maybe that'll help with Shenyi and I think some things will click. I don't think they're going to be looking like the 10th place team for the rest of the split, personally.
Something that I have actually enjoyed doing is watching Shenyi in Champions Queue. He streams Champions Queue pretty frequently, and I have pretty mixed feelings on his shot calling, because that's what so many people were talking about when there was the rumor mill of communication and whether or not it was clear.
Well, and he said about himself, right? Hey, I'm a great shot caller, but they won't let me.
Yeah.
It's kind of...
There was some weirdness there, and he talks
Yeah.
a lot. So there are definitely ways where that can be very confusing.
Yeah.
And when I watched Champions Queue, I mean, I know it's, ancient history in 2011, but I was like a shot caller, so to speak. And I've listened to a lot of teams comms. I think communication can be very important and can sometimes be not important at all in League. And there's so many pros and cons to someone who will shot call like Shenyi. I think the way I'd almost describe it is he is trying to micro his teammates in Champ Q. Like, he'll have a Victor in midwave and he'll be like, no, don't farm that, recall now. And like, if you're not used to that, it can be very disruptive to your focus.
And if you haven't like given them like implicit permission to be the leader of the entire team, it's like in anything else. If you don't have if you don't have somebody that you've all agreed that this is the person calling the shots and we're going to submit to that, then doing that is going to rub people the wrong way. They're like, hey, who put you in charge?
Yes.
As a side note, it doesn't surprise me at all that you did shot calling because you've got the Guild Wars background, and shot calling in Guild Wars, from my experience as well, is very, very important, more so than in League.
Did you play like Guild versus Guild in Guild Wars? This is a big tangent. Yeah, the reason for the viewers...
I was a shot caller too.
Oh, really? Well, we've never talked about this. It's crazy because the minimap didn't cover the whole map. That was one of the reasons communication was so important, because you needed to be able to describe what was happening and nobody could see it. Plus you needed to call spikes because healing was overpowered.
If there's a team and calling spikes, very important to coordinate very tightly. So
lots of saying 3, 2, 1. That was the majority of my Guild Wars shot calling. But anyway, back to League. I think Yursan was never supposed to be this savior. If anything, he was supposed to be an addition by subtraction if Shenyi was in fact subtracting from the team. And I think the 2 weeks of them still being in last place convinced them, the 5 games he played with the 1-4 record convinced them, let's actually just go with Shenyi. He's putting in the hours in Champions Queue. We're possibly going to build from here. What are your, I guess, this coming week predictions, but more so the next 4 weeks? Because TSM is obviously in last place now at 1-8, bottom of the table in all stats. Do you see them turning it around? And if so, by how much?
I think they will turn it around a bit, depending on, like, the takeover thing is a little bit hard to predict based on. I think if I really had to say who do I think is a better player between Takeover and Keaiduo, I'd still say Keaiduo probably seems like a little bit of a better player, but I think TSM will look a little better. Like I said, I don't think they'll feel like the 10th place team for the rest of the split. I think they'll probably still sit 10th in the standings. Like, they might be able to get 3 or 4 wins in the next round robin rather than 1. And that'll be good enough to feel like maybe a 7th, 8th team, and maybe give them some momentum to summer, which is what they really care about, right? Like, they don't really care where they land in the standings this split now. They just want to set up well for summer.
I think they'd like to say they don't care. I think they care a lot.
Well,
a 10th place finish for TSM is something they're probably trying to avoid with every fiber of their being. They play FlyQuest first, which is, to me, the game I have circled, because FlyQuest had the hot start but lost every game in Super Week. TSM also lost every game in Super Week. They're 2 teams with the biggest losing streaks in the league. If they can win that one, I think that's a sign of a turnaround. But if they go 0-2, then I would be shocked if the starting roster for week 5 is the starting roster for week 7. I think they're going to keep spinning until they find some wins.
Teams that I would think they have the best chance of beating in the next 4 weeks: FlyQuest, Dignitas, CLG. Those are the ones that seem to be struggling the most right now. Maybe you can pull a game off of Immortals. And if you can steal an upset over one of the top 4 or 5 teams, of course, that's going to be huge. But those are the ones that, and it is FlyQuest, Golden Guardians in this next week, where you think you got to be able to win one of those. If you can't win, like you said, if you can't win one of those, well, I don't know what you do after that.
Then they're trapped in the cellar. Then they are starting their summer split conversations almost immediately.
And then the conversation does get very interesting because regardless of their plan coming in and how the coaching staff feel and all that kind of stuff, when you have an owner as passionate and as Reginald and and with as much history of getting involved when things don't seem to be on track, you got to think he's going to be pushing really hard for something big to happen, like a mid-season roster change, signing somebody, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And then we'll have to see whether they actually go ahead with that or not.
Yeah. My overall take after all the discussion in this video is I think they will be slightly better, but it doesn't overall change the opinion I have on the team. I'm actually happy, weirdly enough, I'm happy with both of these moves, but I think they're small steps. I don't think any of these things is like, oh my God, I can't believe they pulled that off. Like Jensen's back. Like there's nothing crazy like that's happening. I don't really expect that to happen this split, especially after what they've done.
That's a mid-split change, if anything.
Exactly. Do you have anything else you want to add before we wrap up?
No, I think I skew mildly positive on TSM, and I have the main thing I was really negative about in all of this situation was just that they were struggling to communicate well with the fans, and I think they've made a big step in the right direction with that. And now what they do competitively, of course, is the second, big pillar of all of that. And I think, like you said, it's a minor step in the right direction. But they're going to need like really big step ups in individual performance if they want to actually put the whole season back on track.
Yeah, you can communicate great, but if you're like 2-16, people are still going to hate you. That's just the nature of how things go. Thanks so much for coming on the show again, Tim. You can check out his stuff on the Twitter that's posted here in the video. You can go to oracleselixir.com to check out all the stats. And you also have a series that runs on Travis Gafford's YouTube channel as well as your own YouTube. So
Used to.
There's a lot of stuff. Used to. He has videos posted on Travis Gafford's YouTube channel from Run It last split. That's what I know for sure. Okay. Thanks again for coming on, and for everybody else, like and subscribe and do all the YouTube stuff so you can see the videos when they come out as soon as they're published. See everybody next time.